Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our special council meeting for Wednesday, June 12th, 2024. We respectfully acknowledge the land on which we gather and work is the unceded traditional territory of the Comox First Nation, the traditional keepers of the land. So first item is for adoption of the agenda for June 12th. If I can get a mover and a seconder, and we are online, so please use mics to make moved. Seconded. All those in favor? And for our agenda items, we are just going to move Bill 44 implementation of the small scale multifamily housing as item A on the agenda. Just over to staff. Do we need to have unanimous consent to move the items? Okay, so I'm just going to move that we have Bill 44 on page 124 be moved to A and rezoning application 23-6 moved into B. If I can get a seconder for that.
Second.
All those in favor of the swap of those two? Thank you, and that is approved. So we have on page 124, Bill 44 implementation for small scale multifamily housing, first, second, and third reading of Comox zoning amendment bylaw number 1850.47. And we have Nancy with us from Urban Systems online. Welcome, Nancy.
Good evening, Mayor and Council.
And so we have the recommendation from CAO Wall in front of you on page 124. Before we open up for discussion, is there any, Nancy's going to, perfect. So I'll turn that over to Nancy for your time before we get into the recommendation.
All right, thank you for that. I'm just going to share my screen. And can you all see that okay?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. All right. So this evening we are presenting some amending bylaws to accommodate the provincial small scale housing initiative. And we wanted to sort of walk you through that in terms of, and council has had an overview on sort of 2 occasions before. So keeping that in mind, we'll keep the sort of overview fairly brief, but also recognize that there may be some people in the audience that this may be new to, and then get into the zoning amendment before you for consideration of first, second, and third reading in more detail. And happy to answer any questions along the way. If council wishes to interrupt, please do so. So this initiative is coming from the province as part of their Bill 44 amendments. And that is, there's many legislative changes that have been happening of late, but this is the focus of the presentation tonight, is specifically on the small scale multi-unit housing. The intention of the province is to streamline development approvals, to remove rezoning requirements for small-scale infill type development of less than 6 units in some municipalities, but in the case of Comox, 4 units and less. And the purpose of this is to really streamline the supply of housing across BC, where there is a very known shortage across the province, and to provide just more housing options in general. And the shift to more proactive land use planning is a desire of the province to avoid the long times that it takes to rezone properties in general in local government in British Columbia. The Bill 44 housing statutes does require in the case of Comox, up to 4 units of housing based on some certain situations, which we'll go over. In some cases, it's 3. In other cases, it's 2. So we'll make sure that's clearly articulated. And it does also require, beyond the scope of this presentation, but the municipality to update the housing needs report, and as well as anticipate 20 years of growth, projected growth as identified in your housing needs report in your official community plan, and then pre-zone for that growth. So this small scale housing can play a big part of ensuring that you have growth for 20 years in your community as well. The province has prohibited public hearings for many housing related rezonings, but also for small scale housing. So there is no public hearing associated with this this bylaw. However, there has been notice posted in the Comox Valley Record on 2 occasions, providing notice of first reading. So this legislation and what it's requiring municipalities to do is essentially allow for 2 units, so a single family plus a secondary suite or carriage house or coach house in Comox's terms, and many people also refer to them as ADUs or accessory dwelling units on every lot in the province, essentially. They do want to see this in sort of rural settings and lots that are not connected to sewer and water, but still allowing sort of 1 additional property or 1 additional secondary use. On lots that are less than 280 meters squared with services, so sewer and water, 3 units are permitted, and lots between 280 square meters all the way up to 4,050 square meters. There's an expectation that 4 units will be permitted on those lots. One thing I should also note is in that 1 secondary suite or coach house scenario would also apply to lots greater than that 40, 50 square meter mark, because the province is also seeing that those lots that are larger could accommodate more density and be considered for sort of future density as well. So it's an important thing to distinguish. And then in some communities, they're dealing with 6 lots and no parking requirements whatsoever, but I won't get into that because it doesn't apply to Comox. The province has established a policy manual and site standards where they've established sort of 3 different scenarios and recommended zoning provisions from front setbacks to parcel coverage, height, and parking, for example. And they have set up in the legislation that the municipality is required to consider these recommended site standards by the province, and when you are providing your zoning amendment to the province, as you're required to do so by June 30th, you also need to provide rationale as to when you're not following these standards, and like why it's different and why it might work for Comox. And what they want to make sure is that the municipality is not like unreasonably deterring the small scale infill housing in your community by having onerous standards. So that's something that is important to consider as we're going through this. And so what is what we've often called like small scale multi-unit housing or small scale multifamily housing as per the exact terminology in the legislation. The province did change the way that they've referred to small scale multifamily housing to small scale multi-unit housing, as generally the word family is being dropped by many zoning sort of best practices these days. But in general, we're all talking about the same thing, often called missing middle or gentle density as well. Is that this is sort of ground oriented residential housing of 3 stories or less with sort of ground oriented, meaning that people are gaining entrance from the exterior of the building into their units versus like a common hallway or elevator as you would in an apartment. They want to essentially see housing getting added to single family properties that already exist, or potentially if there is older housing, new builds, and creating more flexibility in all situations to sort of have this small scale housing more prominently infilling in our neighborhoods where there is existing services and access to daily needs. Okay, so in terms of what this means for Comox, we've continued to refine our mapping from the last time that we met, but we did, this does apply, the legislation doesn't apply to manufactured or mobile homes. However, it was identified and discussed at council at our last meeting that there is the R1.2 zone, which is a mobile home zone, which we're suggesting that you also consider the small scale housing on, and that's 63 parcels. The mobile home zone does already permit single family, so it doesn't have to be mobile home uses, and it's in an area where the communities and the towns identified increased density. And then there's over 4,000 lots that we're considering in the residential zone, the R1.0 zone that we're recommending, that would allow up to 4 units. There's very few lots. It's really 3 buildable lots that are less than 280 square meters and would allow only the 3 units, so very few in the town. And then we've got 81 rural residential properties, and these numbers are excluding the extension requests that I'll briefly touch on that we received direction from on May 22nd to apply to the province for an extension. In terms of the development projections, I think it's important to note that we're expecting that this type of development to be incremental in the community. Generally, it's going to likely be placed on properties there's infill opportunity in terms of a coach house or 2, or secondary suite development potentially. But when you get into the 4-unit redevelopment or townhouse type development of a maximum of 4 units, where you're tearing down an existing home, generally that home is getting to be, fully depreciated, flat lots, and generally close to services, where you're going to be seeing more of this change in the communities that have been allowing this for a while. It's the older neighborhoods that are seeing the most change. At the same time, Comox does have several greenfield developments that may change their plan from a single unit or a duplex unit into 4 units as you move forward. So you may see some more significant change in those cases. But there's still, supply is dependent on demand for these types of units. And the province has done a study where they're anticipating 130,000 net new units because of this legislation change. So that would be over and above like what the town would typically see. So when you look at the Comox's proportional share, that's approximately 40 net new units per year. So when you look at your housing needs report, and this is, a little bit of a linear approach to it, but right now you're seeing, that there's quite a significant net new demand and a shortage of that demand in the draft housing needs report. So in 2023, you're already short 215 units plus needing additional units. So when you take what you typically see in multifamily development on an annual basis on average, and you add the 40 net new units, you're still at 169 residential units. So you're still short of even the identified housing need. So something to keep in mind, this is a tool and part of the solutions with the housing crisis, but there'll be much more that's needed to meet the demand. And the town is also has been awarded the Housing Accelerator Fund and provided commitments as part of that. And one of the initiatives is the missing middle plex zoning action implementation. That was a commitment as part of that funding program. And then also before this legislation came out, there was the accessory dwelling unit bylaw amendments and incentive strategy. So this zoning amendment before you helps fulfill both of those initiatives. At our last meeting on May 22nd, where we were discussing this, we did receive direction from council to apply for extension requests based on our infrastructure review for both what we're calling the Kai Bay area, including Point Homes and Lazo, because of some geotechnical issues and rural infrastructure that exists there, and generally being outside what would be considered the urban containment boundary, as well as what we're calling the Western Foreshore, due to an identified servicing capacity issue that has a capital project attached to it, which is planned for in the sort of 2027 to 2030 timeframe. So both those extension applications were submitted to the province prior to the June 1st deadline, and the province has acknowledged receiving them. So these areas are not included in the SHMU initiative, if you will, in terms of there's until an extension request until 2030. There is a chance that they wouldn't be approved, and then the province would give the town 90 days to place the zoning in these locations or wherever they didn't support the application. So in terms of the zoning amendment that's before you and attached to the council report, we wanted to keep it as simple as possible. We needed to consider the provincial site standards, but also like recognizing the context of the town of Comox and making sure that what we were proposing is going to fit and be reasonable, because the province is certainly going to be reviewing amending bylaws to make sure that they're not unreasonable. We wanted to incorporate things such as setbacks and tree canopy and open space when that's important to the town as we did this analysis. It also came out that sort of the maximum driveway width was important to the town, and including like front yard landscape areas, and ensuring that the integrity of sidewalks were maintained by continuing with the town's approach to sort of reduce driveway widths. And again, you know, with this in mind, we were also anticipating that uptake would be incremental and change would be measured. So the approach as presented previously, we've made some changes to the approach that was presented at May 22nd, which I'll just make sure that I do highlight. So we have included the 63 parcels for the R1.2 mobile zone to allow up to 4 units as mentioned. And then very significantly, you know, there's over 4,000 units that are considered restricted zones and that they allow single family and duplex in the town. Many zones that were identified as what the province calls as restricted zones. And what we're proposing is to consolidate them into a one zone R1.0 for small scale multifamily housing. And so that these would all essentially become the one zone and be rezoned to R1.0. The large lot zone, R3.3, we've proposed text amendments to that zone to accommodate small scale housing only when required. So anything over 40, 50, for example, or if there's no sewer or water connection, then it would just be the this is single family with an accessory dwelling unit, if you will. And then we have 141 parcels in the Kai Bay extension area, and those zones would be maintained as they are. There's also the R3.3 zone in the Kai Bay area, and that's specifically sort of exempted in the amending bylaw, so that's clear for everybody sort of reviewing that zone. And then the West Foreshore area, all but one lot was zoned R1.1. So we're recommending that those lots be just stay as they are as R1.1 until the Western Foreshore sewer project is complete. And at that time, then they will also need to get rezoned to R1.0. There was one property that was zoned R3.2, and we've included a zoning amendment to bring that property into the R1.1 zone as the R3.2 zone is now deleted or proposed to be deleted. Okay, so I think we've covered the fact that we're looking to consolidate the zones, and the purpose of that is also just for simplicity and interpretation. There was a lot of zones that had sort of similar siting, and then they all needed to be considered as per the site standards by the province. So we've just created this one zone. We've also amended the mobile zone to allow up to 4 units. And as mentioned, we've got the Western Foreshore area that we've just made that one change. You'll see that one little lot being switched over to R1.1. The deletion of numerous zones and replacing. We've got new siting parameters outlined in the R1.0 and R1.2 zones, which I will go over in detail for council, and also are outlined in your report in more detail with tables. And then we've got the rural zones, the R1.2, 1.3, 3.3, CD5, and CD18, which would allow up to 4 units only when required. So, and there's many situations that both servicing may not be there, or they're larger than 40, 50 square meters, for example. But for the most part, we're trying to keep the height and siting maintained in those zones, as well as parcel coverage. And then, yeah, we've got that absolute clarity added in some of those zones in terms of they do need water and sewer to increase the density. And that's both, not just one. And then we've got some changes in definitions just to add additional clarity and accommodate the provisions in the zoning amendment. So in terms, we've kind of touched on these parcels, but it's sort of important to sort of acknowledge the number of lots that are impacted. And I think we've covered this in the presentation for the most part. I think it's also important to note that with the provincial legislation to also bring your OCP, do an OCP review by 2025, and also corresponding zoning bylaw amendments to pre-zone for future growth, there will be opportunities to kind of evaluate how this is being implemented and opportunities to consider change in that bylaw as long as it's in alignment with the existing legislation. So in all the urban zones, we've added duplex if it wasn't there already, as well as townhouse to a maximum of 4 units in the zone. And then in the rural zones, it's single detached generally, but we've also added the duplex or the townhouse as well, only when those circumstances do apply. The parcel coverage of existing zones, so this is essentially the amount of buildings over the parcel, is 30 to 40%. The provincial site standards are recommending 50%. We have recommended a sliding scale in the R1 zone, which is like a 25 to 50%, depending on the number of units. And you'll see in attachment 2 of the report, there's many development concepts that have been provided for council's consideration as well, that kind of prove out that these types of dwellings can be provided on the lot within that 25 to 50% range. And we've also provided like a maximum building area as well, just in case on a larger lot, to sort of keep the amount of built area somewhat reasonable. It's still quite large, but something just to consider in terms of, you know, some people looking to build like extraordinarily large homes. There's some limitations there. The height is recommended as per the provincial site standards up to 3 stories in order to sort of also meet some of the trade-off considerations in terms of like maintaining backyards and trees and getting the required parking on the site. It's really hard to fit that in without going to 3 stories. The coach house height as well, the province has even 3 stories as a recommendation. For the town of Comox, we've recommended a maximum of 2 stories. The lower the coach house is, so if it's 1 story, it can be closer to the property line than a 2-story coach house. In terms of the setbacks, the provincial site standards are quite small compared to what you're seeing in the town right now, although there is some zones with the 2.5 and 3 meter setbacks. Many are at the 7.5 meter front yard setback. So the province is recommending 2 meters. We in the zoning amendment bylaw before you are recommending 3 meters with a 6 meter setback to the face of the garage. And the purpose of that 6 meters to the face of the garage or carport is to allow parking in front of that the interior parking facility or garage so that you can have a car there without overhanging on the sidewalk and impeding sort of the pedestrian network as well. And that's something that many municipalities do incorporate into their bylaws. The rear setback, the province has, 1.5 meters. The Comox is 4.5 to 7.5 in your existing bylaws, and we've recommended 5 meters to a 3-story principal building. So coach houses are less. The interior side recommendation of the province is at 1.2. We've recommended 1.5 to make sure that you have 3 meters between buildings on either side of the property line, and that provides some more design flexibility for all involved due to building code limiting distance requirements, and certainly have proved out that that's workable in the town's larger lot context. And the exterior side yard as well, we've kept them larger just based on the context in Comox at 3 to 6 meters if there is a garage entry at that point versus the provincial requirement of 1.2 meters. In terms of the coach houses, I think we've covered this just sort of through our discussion, but that sliding scale of 1.5 for a 1-story up to 4 meters for a 2-story, just to pull those back further away from that rear yard. The interior side is the same as the principal dwelling at 1.5. And then with that exterior side, just having a little bit more room when you're on a corner lot as well. In terms of the rural zones, we're trying to stay consistent because the lots are so large, and you'll see in the sort of graphic representation of the rural properties, it's because you're dealing with a larger parcel area, it's easier to fit these additional units on without making a lot of changes to the siting. And these are areas in the smaller town, you don't necessarily have these rural lots in urban areas. So we definitely are just trying to accommodate that increased density without making a lot of change to the rural character. It's anticipated that people might be interested in like a different, especially like coach houses in the rural areas as well, but looking at them a little bit different than the majority of the lots that are in the sort of urban area, urban context. In terms of parking, the existing bylaws in the R1.1 zone is 2 for a single family dwelling. And then if you do allow a suite or a coach house, it's still 2. It's like 1 per each. So it's not a huge shift to have that 1 space per unit, especially if you have that ADU on site. If you only had a standalone, single family dwelling, the minimum requirement was 2, and now it's 1. But the landowner could potentially have more parking if they so desired. The province's in their procedures manual was half a space if it's within 800 meters of a transit stop with frequent service, which there's nowhere in Comox that does meet that threshold, and then 1 space per unit otherwise. So you are in alignment with the provincial recommendation. Just wanted to share, these are attached to your council report. I'll go through a few of the scenarios. So when this is a 650 meter lot, which is sort of a threshold where it's a lot easier to fit additional density on when you're reaching 650 meters with parking. In this case, this just shows you actually something that wouldn't align with your bylaws right now, in that let's imagine there's a principal dwelling already on the property with a garage and a driveway. But in order to get to a coach house in the back, they couldn't use that driveway or provide parking off that driveway. So this is an example where a second driveway would be required to to provide the parking on site. And that's just something that would require a variance. In terms of another scenario of sort of 4 townhouses lined up on the street, and just what that would look like. These are each 150 square meter townhouses. So that's, I think, roughly 1,600 to 1,700 square feet each at 3 stories. Here's a fourplex unit. Again, this is now you're getting into a larger lot at 957, which is there's many lots in Comox that are around that 1,000 square meter mark, and showing an example where the parking is also at the rear of the building. If they set the principal building back, then they could have that closer, but we do have some provisions in the zone as well for that minimum driveway widths, and also tree planting and landscape planting on 50% of the front yards, like recognizing that importance to Comox to have that tree canopy maintained, and nice front yards with vegetation has also been worked into the bylaw. And here's an example of a rural property. So they have water and they have sewer. They're less than 40, 50 square meters. The province has now set up parameters where they can also have up to 4 units. And here's an example of, you know, a similar townhouse development on a rural property, and you can see that there's ample room to do that, even maintaining the existing setbacks and site coverage. And there's a similar example just with duplexes as well. And so you're only at a 9% lot coverage in these examples. So where do we go from here? So has been mentioned to council previously is that this is a provincially mandated requirement. It's happened very quickly for local governments. There are other bylaws that require consideration and amendment, such as the subdivision servicing bylaw, and that review is underway as we speak. There may be some changes to the building bylaw or development finance considerations, such as the DCCs, making sure that they're appropriately capturing this type of growth in the community. And there is existing development permit guidelines in the OCP, which will continue to apply. But the review of those development permit guidelines as well will be part of the OCP review. And there may be some required amendments earlier than the OCP adoption, just based on sort of the implementation of these new regulations. This type of work is going to take a little bit longer than the June 30th deadline that the province has provided. However, we do expect that development will be incremental, and this will be able to be managed on an application specific basis, but something that does need to be considered. So should council give 3 readings of this bylaw tonight? The bylaws will be scheduled for adoption. This does need to occur prior to June 30th. And written confirmation of the zoning amendment to the province must be provided by June 30th, including like the rationale for not following the site standards exactly. And then we do anticipate some draft amendments to other bylaws coming in the future months. And it will be also important as part of the town's sort of development application improvement processes and streamlining to develop guides and web materials to support implementation of this initiative. And the recommendation I've put on my screen just for council's convenience, that is included in your reports, that having considered the provincial policy manual and site standards, Comox zoning amendment bylaw number 1850-47 be given first, second, and third readings is the recommendation before you for consideration. And with that, I will stop my sharing and hand over to council if you have any questions.
Thank you, Nancy. So we'll open the floor for questions from council. We have Councillor Blacklock.
Thank you for that, Nancy. It's a lot of work to go through all our numerous zones and try to condense this for us into what essentially is 3 zones. My question is with respect to the large scale or the large lot properties over 4,000 square meters. I think we identified 93 of those properties, and now we're down to 81. And so my question is, what happened to those 12 properties?
Through the chair. So first of all, those properties are either don't have sewer or water. or, you know, they're the parcels over 40, 50. So it could be 1,000 square meter parcel without sewer water that would hit that classification, I believe. And then we've got what happened to those properties is that they've been deleted because they were in what's now an extension area. So for example, in the Kai Bay area, there were some R3.3s.
So just a quick follow-up then, we have properties in the middle of this town that are over half-acre properties of 1,000 square meters. Some of those properties have been recently been developed in the last 5 years with large single-family homes. Some of those single-family homes have been oriented to the back lot line in what I could only guess might be a future opportunity to build coach houses in the front yard. And but the terms of this bylaw don't seem to support front yard coach houses. I'm just wondering what the rationale for that is.
In terms of like the R 1.0 zone, we've certainly coach houses could be built in the front yard. So that is something that has changed from the definition of a coach house. As well as I think there are some owner occupancy requirements in there as well.
Okay, you're right. If I've read that wrong, then excuse me. You know, my question is that the municipalities with Bill 44 cannot be seen to be attempting to frustrate the increased density provisions of Bill 44. I know other municipalities have been struggling with, because this, you know, essentially represents a very fundamental change in the population densities of our towns. And I'm wondering if at these new densities, what it, you know, other municipalities, what in terms of sewer capacity, road capacity, water system capacity, hospital capacity, what tree canopy protection, like what, when we go to review the rest of our bylaws after this, with this bylaw in on top of it, you know, how do we ensure that we're not overstretching our existing infrastructure?
But through the chair, working with staff, we have done infrastructure reviews. And I mean, that's exactly the reason for the 2 extension requests that the town have submitted to the province. We have identified, you know, at least one other sewer project that will probably need to be prioritized in order to facilitate the increased growth. And that's also, you know, identified in the sewer master plan as well currently. The town of Comox's water system is, we did consider this. You've got quite an adequate water system. You're in quite good shape that way. There's also some provisions from a building code in terms of like reducing fire demand. So in terms of like the infrastructure in Comox, it was a consideration, but without a doubt, you know, there is going to be some impacts over the long term on infrastructure, and the province has provided, you know, some funding programs to help municipalities upgrade infrastructure as well.
Thank you very much.
Just a question. I'm not sure if there's kind of any of these mid rezones happening, but on the June 30th, if final reading is done as we legislatively need to do, would there be properties that get grandfathered back that weren't considered exemption based on where they are in the process of a rezone? Or if it's midway through a rezone, this hits, it's what the new 3 zones are and that's it?
Madam Mayor, the staff did anticipate some properties that are currently being rezoned, and we admitted them from the zoning amendment before you so that we weren't in the situation where we were rezoning them as they were being rezoned and accidentally rezone them back. So we've tried to omit those properties. We've also added a clause. Staff identified some properties that have just like recently been given development permits, but have said yet to apply for a building permit. So in the R 1.0 zone, there's a provision to accommodate exactly that, so that they have a period of time to get their permits in as per their approved development permit. Just so that they're not caught in a situation where council has recently approved something and then now they can't do it. So that's outlined in your report on page 159, clause 5, at the top, like almost the top of the page, page 22 of the report.
Thank you. Page 22 of the report. Councillor Grant, thank you for the answer there.
Yeah, thanks. Just a little more on what Steve was talking about. I've noticed on our correspondence coming in, we're getting a lot more questions about traffic flow. And I think people are anticipating this growth and realizing that our streets just aren't going to be able to handle it. Is there any provisions for that from the federal government to help, or the provincial government, sorry, to help us out with that? And I can think of half a dozen off the top of my head, areas that are just going to be, like, this is going to be the next biggest issue that we run into, I think.
Through the chair, I mean, traffic is one, because this is such a big change, and I've been working across the province in a number of municipalities, and it's one of those things that it's like, it's going to be incremental, traffic's going to be impacted, but it's not like you're going to try and, like, the most important thing is ideally like fire flows and maintaining those. So traffic, I think from the provincial perspective, is that they're hoping people are going to start getting out of their cars and on their bikes and into the buses. That being said, most definitely from, history, is people do really love their cars, and there will be increased traffic over time, or traffic growth. And, one thing that the town can do, and is on the list of projects with the Housing Accelerator Fund, is updating your development cost charge fees, so that with this growth, you can also start accumulating funds to pay for necessary road network and other infrastructure upgrades.
Councillor Mayor and then Councillor Hazlitt, please. Thank you. This, I think, is a question for staff. So as we kind of learn about perhaps unintended consequences from some of the changes, what will be the process for us to make adjustments?
Well, as we move through, I think that we're going to gain a lot of knowledge, not just from what we're seeing, but what's happening across the province. And then it'll be zoning amendments. It'll be amendments to the other bylaws. We know, for example, that we're working through our subdivision and servicing bylaw right now. And so that's going to take into account some of the learned lessons as municipalities move through this, as well with other regulations when it comes to trees. We're doing our urban canopy work right now. So it'll just be bylaw amendments when the time comes to make the change.
Thank you.
My question kind of carries on with what Councillor Mayor had to say. You'd mentioned you were doing some other work in other communities across the province. How are they handling all this? I mean, I'm going to go out and assume that a lot of these communities are hoping they get the most of it right, and then after everything passes, they've had some time to back and look. They're going to start making changes there. Is it fair to say that that's the way most communities are dealing with this at the moment, due to the stringent timelines?
I think most municipalities do want to monitor the implementation of this. Some municipalities, like council, may wish to provide directions, for example, to provide a monitoring report in a year or 18 months. I think those are only going to be natural as you also have already, authorized an OCP review. So there's going to be opportunities to revise. I think it's something to kind of watch closely and see what the uptake is like. Listening there, even in terms of engagement with the community and the development community, if they're starting to see that they're maybe can achieve this with a certain setback or something like that, you're going to hear from them, and they might be also requesting like changes to the bylaw. But it is going to be as presented and as discussed with council on May 22nd. Like, there's likely going to be needed to review and revise the bylaw potentially, and it is anticipated that there'll be a comprehensive review of the zoning bylaw in alignment with the OCP for the end of 2025. So at the very least, there'll be opportunities to make amendments then. As long as the legislation stays in place, it will be under the same parameters, but still you could be tweaking the bylaw. If you're running into issues in the shorter term than that, it's always possible for council to continue to amend their bylaws in accordance with this legislation, though.
Thank you.
Councillor Mayor and then Councillor Kerr. Thanks for that, Nancy. I really like the idea of hearing back in 12 to 18 months about how it's going
what the uptake is, what the impacts are and the lessons learned. So just a question to staff, if you would prefer a motion for that, or if that's just something that we can expect as part of business.
A motion for that would be good.
You'd like to make that motion, Councillor Mayor, that'd be good.
All right, so I'll put forward a motion asking for a monitoring report in 12 to 18 months to report on uptake, impacts, and lessons learned.
Any questions or comments having that formalized that we'd like a report back? I feel like we would all really like that, considering the implications here. Councillor Blacklock?
We'll just want to clarify what, like, you know, what's the scope of said report? You know, they could get pretty large and onerous on our staff. So I want to make sure that we're not creating work.
Perhaps I'll go to CAO Wall just to comment on this
I think
before
we
we
got the
go.
cart before the horse here too, don't we? I mean, we haven't passed the bylaw yet, and we're already monitoring.
It's on the
Fair-
table for
fair
discussion,
comment.
so we can vote it down if people want to have it voted on later, but I believe it's on the floor now, so. Okay, so we'll vote, we still have to vote, so over to CAO Wall for comment. And then
The scope of this would be, I would think, the number of times that we're seeing density built beyond what would have been in the zoning that we have today for the small scale multi-unit. So if you have somebody building a coach house on their property, it would probably be outside the scope of the report. But if you have somebody building, a coach houses in the areas that the coach houses are already approved, likely be outside the scope of the report. If you're starting to get triplexes or coach houses in areas that we don't currently allow them, that would be inside the scope of the report.
And I would just say, well, we may be out of sequence. We know the bylaw is going to be passed by June 30th, so I would be okay to vote on it now, but we'll get more feedback. Councillor Kerr.
Yeah, I'm okay voting on it now, especially if it's important for Council Mayor that we have a report coming in the future, and that would give us more comfort in actually voting for the proposed other readings. Then I would say it's okay to vote on it first.
Any other questions or comments before we vote on a report coming within the scope of anything new that was built that wouldn't have been built with our current bylaws in 12 to 18 months from staff? Okay, all those in favor? Opposed? That passes unanimously. Thank you. And we have comment from Councillor Kerr.
Yeah, just this is a question for staff on the theme of unintended consequences. There's a letter received, I guess, by the town today, and I think we got it about 21 minutes before this meeting, so I'm not certain if everyone on council had a chance to read it, but just around, property that currently in the queue of development, and I believe is R5.2 zoning, and that would be changed to R1.0 under the new bylaw. So just the letter just states that they would lose.
Just to pause here, Councillor Kerr, we actually, after this conversation, are going to have an amendment to the agenda to add that correspondence. So
Okay.
we will actually open up that letter for either receipt or discussion.
Okay,
So just to
That's great.
update you on that, it is coming
Okay,
onto the
perfect.
agenda formally.
thank you. Just curious though, the question is this, what we'll be voting on soon is they're saying that they would lose the ability to have a single family infill. And would that happen to this property owner and or others that may be in the queue? Again, unintended consequences, not sure if this is true or if this would affect what we want to be voting on tonight. Thanks.
We'll be receiving correspondence before we vote on it. So I'm just going to make a decision to hold and get there shortly. We have Nancy with us for part of the evening. So if there's questions, what we'll do is we'll ask questions over to Nancy and we'll get any of those answered, and then we'll move on to correspondence before voting for the bylaws. Any CAO?
Yeah, no, I can jump in on that question. Yes, the ability to have small lot, single family doesn't exist anymore. I think that's the best way to look at it. Single family is no longer a type of land use in British Columbia. So there will be no opportunity for council to zone to have single lot, single family infill unless the lots are below that minimum parcel size. And then you're getting into it being so small anyway that you're going to end up functionally with row houses or duplexes because the lots are going to be so small anyway. But yes, single family will functionally not exist in the town of Comox moving forward.
And subdivision would not be possible even to like 2 fourplex lots if it's a bigger lot.
No, you can subdivide,
Okay.
but you just can't
subdivision is
subdivide with the intent of having that
Single family.
gentle, single family density.
Thank you for clarifying. Any other questions for Nancy? Okay, thank you very much for answering our questions. And you'll be online until you need to depart. And thank you so much for sharing that with us again this evening before we vote on first, second, and third reading. So we do have an amendment to the agenda to add correspondence. So if I can get a motion for receipt, so for an addition to the agenda of correspondence for RZ 24-3. There's 5 pieces of correspondence under that RZ 24-3 that we'll be adding and possibly discussing. Can I get a seconder for that to be added to the agenda?
Second.
And all those in favor for the addition of RZ 24-3 correspondence? Thank you. So that's added to the agenda. The second item is to receive correspondence for RZ 23-6 to the agenda, and there is 1 item under RZ 23-6. Moved, seconded. All those in favor of adding that to the agenda? And that passes unanimously. So we're moving on now to that correspondence. The first item is RZ 24-3. There is 5 items there for receipt. We will be able to take this into consideration between now and the final reading. Or if I get indication that people want to take a 5-minute break, we can also do that. But all those in favor of receipt of those 5 communications that have come in. Okay, so that's, moved. Can I get a seconder for receipt? Moved, seconded. Any questions or comments before we move receipt? All those in favor? And is there any items on those 5 that was received today at 4:40 p.m. on RZ 24-3 for discussion?
I would just request that we could have some time to read these.
Sure. And just to clarify, we're talking about reading tonight, correct? Right now? Okay, perfect. So what we'll do is we'll just take a 10-minute break until 6:05. That's about 11 minutes. There are 5 there, and I would suggest you also read, if possible, the one for the other RZ 23-6. So we'll break for 10 minutes. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for that break for correspondence. So we are looking at RZ 24-3 correspondence. You will also have after today for this consideration, as this is not the final reading and adoption. So just to keep that in mind. Are there any items on those 5 from RZ 24-3 that you have for discussion? Councillor Kerr.
Yes, the one from Hal Martin.
Do we have a seconder? Seconded, and that's the one that came in today on this zoning amendment. Councillor Kerr.
Yeah, thanks. Just to staff, just if maybe any options that we could explore for this question outlined in the letter.
Yeah, thank you. I've had the opportunity to speak with the property owners just during our break, and I think we're going to take it offline and have a discussion amongst staff. There's not too much that we can do. There's not too much the council can do at this time. You can't amend the bylaws to take care of the situation that they're in, but there may be some things we can do administratively to help ensure that they don't lose the zoning that they just received.
Councillor Mayor.
Thank you. And just a point of clarification, people can still build single family homes. It's just that the land would be zoned for more.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Councillor Grant.
Sorry, when this comes back to us for adoption, this will be on the agenda and we'll be able to have a more fulsome discussion on this. Mr. Varela's thing, because I mean, we got given this letter in 5 minutes to read it, and you know, I'm not really clear what it is we're going to do, and I'm not really clear what he's looking for either.
This isn't an issue that council's going to be able to resolve. It's going to need to be resolved administratively. The special case that this property is caught into is not something that you're going to be able to legislate your way out of it, because the provincial government is moving forward with their regulations, and you need to ensure that you are compliant with them by the end of the month. But there are things that we can do administratively to help them. So I don't think this is something council is going to be able to solve.
I was thinking in terms of seeing if there was a way to add them to the extension list so that we can at least get some more time.
The extension list had to be submitted previously, and the province wouldn't have considered this. It needs to be pretty serious infrastructure deficits for it to be considered, or life and health and safety, life and death situations.
Okay.
And
Thanks.
just for clarification through the corporate officer, these would be on the agenda next week because we haven't had them on an agenda package. So you'll see these a second time. It was because we were doing the bylaw reading that we received them kind of at that time. So they will be back on the agenda, whether we can do anything about it or not. We'll see.
Fair enough.
Any other items from the package there from RZ 24-3 today? And again, they will be on the agenda next week on June 19th. Okay, we did add correspondence for RZ 23-6 of one item. It now is known that we don't need that on the agenda tonight. That will be on the agenda for next week or future week. So I will just make a motion to have that removed from receipt.
Move. Second.
Moved and seconded, and all those in favor of removing that item? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. So that item is removed. So we're now getting into the actual Bill 44 on page 124 that we've just been talking about. There is a recommendation that, having considered the provincial policy manual and site standards, Comox zoning amendment bylaw 1850.47 be given first, second, and third reading.
I'll move that.
That's been moved by Councillor Grant, and a seconder. Seconded. And now open for discussion. If any councillors have any further questions before we pass first, second, and third reading of this Bill 44 implementation. Okay, all those in favor? Opposed? And that passes unanimously. And thank you to staff for getting us to this point over the last 4 or 5 months since we first found out this was coming. It's something that obviously has been legislated and we will have to monitor closely to find out what we got right and where we need to adjust. So thank you, everybody, for your work on that. Thanks, Nancy, online. We're now going to item A, which we put second for rezoning application RZ 23-6 for the rezoning application to RM 7.1 townhouses to permit 16 townhouses, townhome units at 458 Anderton Road in Comox. And there's a recommendation that Comox zoning amendment bylaw 1850.45 be given first, second, and third readings.
Moved.
That's moved and seconded. Any questions or comments on that? All those in favor? Opposed? That passes unanimously. And I believe we are at the point of adjournment, which came quickly. Moved and seconded at 6:13. All those in favor? That passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Thanks to staff for staying for the workshop and the special council meeting.